Hello, getting ready here to start Module 1, and I'm just going to put together a little video here. Generally, what I try to do in these module videos is just kind of set the table a little bit, so to speak. I'm not going to get into too many details of the readings, but I do like to just kind of highlight some of the things that I guess stick out to me. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the same for you. And I guess with some of the readings, I do like to just talk a little bit about some of the things that I think are maybe more helpful or less helpful or challenging and that type of thing. Kind of along the lines of my hopes and expectations as far as what you can glean from the readings. So before I get into that, I do just want to reiterate a couple of things. I know I said some of these in the other video too, but I would encourage you with each module to kind of take the same approach. And so I'm just going to kind of list out the things. I know these are also on the Canvas page, so I don't want to insult anybody here, but I do just want to emphasize that I think if you kind of follow these practices, it will make everything seem pretty straightforward. So yeah, if you have already read the syllabus, that's great. If not, I would suggest that you do that. When you go to the modules, the process that I would encourage you to take with each one is, first of all, to read the learning guide. Each module has a learning guide when you click onto it right on the front page. There'll usually be a video like this one, and then there'll be a learning guide, and that kind of goes through the steps. Um, Most of the modules are pretty similar, but I try to put things in those learning guides, like for some of the extended assignments that you should be paying attention to. So, for this module in particular, you should be thinking about your current event topic and making sure you email that to me sooner rather than later so I can get that schedule set up and everybody can know which week they will be responsible to post um, the video to the discussion board with their current event issue. The second thing you should do then is read the assignment, and that's usually listed in the learning guide, and then post on the discussion board, respond to discussion posts, and then, yeah, those are really the steps. And then um, whatever week it is or whatever module we're in, there might be a couple of other things. So anyway, enough of that. I'm going to get into the readings for the first module, and those readings include the introduction, and I'm going to just say very briefly a few things about that. I feel like the introduction, the first half, is a little bit more readable. The second, he really gets into these four various theories of ethics, and I would really encourage you to read that as carefully as you can. But at the same time, um, I'm not going to expect you to know those theories backwards and forwards or anything, but I do think that there's some helpful information in there. They are a little bit complicated. I know for myself, when I read through all four of them, after a while, it just kind of all melds together. But it is helpful in an understanding of, some of the theories out there as it relates to ethics. Um, the other part of the introduction, really the first half, is very interesting to me, and it's written by the editor of the text, William J. Morgan, and he doesn't have a lot of writing in this text, but there are a few areas where he has some little blurbs, and the intro is one of them. And what's interesting to me is just that in the introduction, he talks about how ethics are very significant in sports. And he talks a little bit about our culture and that our culture is more secular and relativistic, and how that affects um, really ethics in sports. And I think he's right about that. The part I really find interesting, though, is when he really tries to explain morality. And I certainly have a bias because I think morality and ethics is very, very hard to defend if you don't have a Christian perspective. Because what are you really basing morality on? But his argument is really basically that at the end of the day, morality is based on a sense of community. And in other words, we want to respect other individuals, and, try to be supportive and compassionate. And it's really pretty difficult for society to operate if there's not a sense of community. And I don't think he's wrong. I think it's a solid argument. But again, I would go back to, if you don't have really, in essence, biblical values, why does it matter? And there's certainly arguments within this text that I think are quite solid, as to the importance of ethics for sports to even operate. Because if we, for example, don't follow the rules, then what really even is a sport? We'll get more into that later, but yeah, I just find it really interesting. And I hope when you go through that, you can kind of relate to that yourself also. The other reading is a reading by Russell, chapter 13. And he really gets into the connection between play and sport. I really like that chapter. It's interesting. He does, at some points get pretty philosophical because he's discussing, some of the philosophies of sport and play, and quotes Heisinger and some of those people who've written a lot about that type of thing. Um, but he really gets into an argument that, in essence, is that the morality and ethics we have in sport are not the same as what we generally have in our day-to-day lives and in society. And I don't think he's wrong. Definitely, I think he makes a great argument, and his argument is kind of based on the idea that um, it's play and the playfulness of sport that affects the way our ethics are when it comes to sports. And his example that I find interesting, and actually a pretty good argument, are, like when kids play. For example, if they're playing cops and robbers and they shoot each other, obviously morally we think murder is a really bad thing and killing people is a bad thing. But because of the fact that it's play and the kids actually know that nobody's really going to die, we generally find it acceptable. And he makes some side comments to an extent, which I think he's correct. And maybe it's a lot less acceptable today than it was when I was a kid. I don't know, but you could use video games as an example too, where there's a lot of violence in video games. Um, but because it's play, it's pretend. Um, we're much more accepting of it now. I think we do question how healthy that is for our society. Um, but anyway, I think the example and the argument does hold some water. Um, and then he goes on to really get into the reason why he thinks morality in sport is different. And his example has to do with things like gamesmanship and shenanigans, which are those little gray areas in sports where we kind of bend the rules and we find it acceptable. And he goes into quite a bit more detail than I'm going to about that. So, you know, yeah, just read through that, and I'll be very interested to see what your thoughts um, are about that. He kind of also gets into, that sports can be really a relentless pursuit of trying to get better and better at it, but there's also always a playful side. And on page 216, um, I highlighted this sentence, but morality, perhaps in particular, can pose impediments to playful engagement in sport as it does in other contexts. I hope I have provided enough evidence already to think that morality should not necessarily take precedent when these values conflict, which is kind of part of his argument that, when we play, we're not as moral and we shouldn't be as hung up on morality, um, because it's a game. And so we do things like gamesmanship and shenanigans and, trash talking and trying to get in the head of our opponent, but it's all in fun. And yeah, I think it's a good argument. I guess for me personally, um, I'm always fighting and I'm sure this is my upbringing and my values and everything, but I'm pretty black and white. And sometimes some of those gamesmanship and shenanigans kind of bother me. But when I really think about it, I do think that he's right, that there's a playfulness to sports where we do accept some of those things. But he also talks about the fact that we have limits. And that's true also. There's also a line in most cases where we feel like shenanigans and gamesmanship moves from that into cheating, and nobody's really okay with that. So it's a super interesting aspect of sports, and I think something that should spur some good discussion.